We've all had that experience, right? You meet someone new, maybe a coworker, someone at a party, and you just click
Yeah.
instantly. It feels effortless, like you see the world in the same way. What is that? What's the secret ingredient there that turns strangers into, well, sometimes lifelong friends? Today we're doing a deep dive into something fundamental about how we connect homophily. It's that old idea, birds of a feather flock together, and you see it everywhere, really. In like big city social maps, online communities, people tend to stick with similar others. But here's the big question, the sort of chicken or egg problem. Are friends similar because they just, start out that way? Like there's some pre-existing alignment. Or do they become similar over time? Through influencing each other. Our mission today is to really unpack this fascinating longitudinal fMRI study. It tried to get at this by looking inside people's brains before they even had a chance to become friends.
Right, and that's the critical difference. We've known from other research, cross-sectional studies, that friends tend to have similar brain structures or similar neural responses when they're already friends. But those studies couldn't tell you why. Was the similarity there first, or did it develop later? This study flips that. It measures brain activity when people are essentially strangers, and then it tracks who actually becomes friends down the line.
So tell us about the setup. Who are these strangers?
Okay, so the participants were this group of 41 incoming graduate students. They were all starting an MBA program at a private university.
Ah, a ready-made social network about to form.
Exactly. And crucially, they did the first brain scan time one, right when the students arrived on campus. The timing was deliberate to minimize the chance they'd already started forming strong bonds or friendships. They were basically scanning strangers who happened to be in the same program.
Strangers in a scanner. Okay, and how do they measure their brains? What were they doing in there?
They used fMRI, and while participants were in the scanner, they watched a series of movie clips, naturalistic audiovisual stimuli, as the researchers called them. It wasn't just random stuff, though. It included documentaries, comedies, debates, a real mix.
Why the variety? Just to keep them awake.
Uh-huh. Well, partly, perhaps.
Yeah.
But the main goal was to use clips that were engaging enough to minimize mind wandering, but also complex enough. Not
Yeah.
complex enough to actually trigger meaningful individual differences in how people's brains responded.
What kind of differences?
Things like emotional reactions, where people focused their attention, how they interpreted what was happening in the story, the kind of processing that differs from person to person.
Okay, so they're watching these clips, their brains are being scanned.
Yeah.
How do you get from that to predicting friendship?
So the key metric was something called interparticipant neural similarity, or IPNRS. Basically, for every possible pair of students in the study, they compared how similar their brain activity patterns were, moment by moment, while watching the same movie clip.
Like, were their brains lighting up in the same places at the same time?
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
A measure of neural synchrony between two people experiencing the same thing. And this was all measured at time one, remember, when they were strangers.
Got it. And then they tracked them.
Yes. They measured their social network connections later on, specifically at time two, which is about 2 months in, and time three, which was 8 months after that initial scan. They mapped out who was friends with whom. They used this measure called geodesic distance, basically, how many steps it takes to get from one person to another in the friend network.
So a distance of 1 means?
Distance 1 means they mutually reported being friends, direct connection. Higher distances mean friends of friends, or even more separated.
Okay, the moment of truth. Did that initial brain similarity, measured back when they were strangers, actually predict who ended up being friends 8 months later at time 3?
Yes, it did. But with a specific pattern. People who became friends, distance 1 at time 3, showed significantly higher pre-existing neural similarity compared to those who were socially distant, like distance 3. But interestingly, this initial predictive effect was concentrated in one particular brain area,
Which area was that?
a specific part of the left orbital frontal cortex, or OFC.
Okay, the OFC. Let's break that down. What does the OFC do? What does similarity there actually mean?
The OSC is really involved in processing subjective value. You can kind of think of it as part of your brain's, what's this worth to me? Or how appealing is this system? So similarity there, in the context of watching these varied clips, likely reflects an alignment in basic tastes and preferences.
Ah, so it's like a neural vibe check. They find the same things funny or engaging or maybe boring.
That's a good way to put it, yeah. It suggests they share a similar subjective evaluation of the stimuli. Like, do we like the same kind of stuff on a brain level?
Okay, that makes intuitive sense. People who like the same things might hit it off. But wait, What about basic homophily? People tend to become friends with others who are similar in age or gender, or maybe studied the same thing in college.
Exactly. That's the critical next step the researchers took. They asked, is this OFC similarity just picking up on those demographic similarities?
And was it?
Largely, yes. When they controlled for a whole range of sociodemographic factors, age, gender, nationality, even their undergraduate major, that significant effect in the left of OFC mostly vanished.
Wow. So what was driving it then?
The analysis suggested that gender similarity in particular was a major factor explaining that link between OFC similarity and being friends 8 months later.
So for that initial friendship formation, being the same gender seemed to account for a lot of that shared taste signal in the OFC. Demographics matter, maybe more than we think, for who we initially connect with.
It seems that way for these initial sort of established friendships at the 8-month mark. Proximity and demographic similarity likely play a big role in who you even get a chance to interact with and form those early bonds. The OFC similarity might reflect that.
Okay, so that's one piece. Similar tastes, partly driven by demographics, predict who is friends later. But you said there was another, maybe more compelling finding.
Yes, this is where they went beyond just looking at who is friends versus who wasn't at time 3. They looked at the change over time. Specifically, they compared pairs of people who actually grew closer between time 2, 2 months, and time 3, 8 months, versus pairs who grew apart or stayed distant during that same period.
Ah, so focusing on the dynamics of the relationship development itself, did that initial neural similarity predict this change?
It did, and this is where it gets really interesting. Compared to the pairs who grew apart, the pairs who grew closer showed significantly higher pre-existing neural similarity back from time 1. But this time, it wasn't just the OFC.
Okay, where else?
It was across a much more extensive set of brain regions, really widespread. We're talking about the bilateral thalamus, the left amygdala,
Yep.
and get this, 40 different cortical regions spread across major functional networks in the brain.
40 regions. Wow, that's a lot more than just the OFC. What kind of networks are we talking about?
We saw significant similarity in regions belonging to the default mode network, or DMN.
Okay, DMN, that's the one people associate with, like mind wandering or self-reflection.
That's part of it, yeah. It's involved in internal thought, mentalizing about others, recalling memories, understanding narratives, kind of your brain's internal world processing, and also regions in the frontoparietal control network, the FPCN.
And the FPCN is more about...
Think of the FPCN as like the brain's executive manager. It helps with regulating attention, planning, decision-making, integrating information from different sources, sort of top-down control.
So similarity across both these massive networks.
Right.
What does that imply about the people who grew closer? It sounds deeper than just liking the same movie clips.
Exactly. It suggests something much more fundamental. Similarity across DMN and FPCN points towards an alignment in how individuals actually make sense of the world around them. It's like they have a similar cognitive framework for interpreting complex situations, for integrating their own thoughts and beliefs with what's happening externally. A shared way of processing reality, perhaps.
That's quite profound. So it's not just shared taste, but a shared way of thinking and understanding.
That seems to be the implication. It's a deeper level of cognitive compatibility reflected in these broad neural patterns when processing complex, naturalistic information like those movie clips.
Okay, but here's the crucial question again. What about the demographics? Did age, gender, background explain this widespread similarity, the one predicting who grew closer?
This is the key distinction. Unlike the OFC finding for static friendship at time 3, this widespread neural similarity predicting who grew closer over time. Well, it remains significant even after controlling for all those sociodemographic variables.
Seriously, so this connection, this predictor of deepening friendship, it goes beyond simple demographic homophily.
That's what the data suggests. This deeper neural alignment seems to be tapping into something more fundamental about interpersonal compatibility, something not captured just by knowing if two people share the same gender or nationality.
Wow. Okay, let's try and pull this together then. We have two main findings.
Right. Finding 1. Initial friendships, the ones established by 8 months, seem linked to similarity in the OFC related to taste, but that's heavily influenced by demographics like gender, maybe reflecting circumstance and opportunity.
Get your foot in the door similarity.
Exactly. But finding 2, the friendships that actually deepen over time, the ones where people grow closer between 2 and 8 months, those are predicted by a much broader pre-existing neural similarity across key sense-making networks. And crucially, This similarity seems independent of those basic demographic factors. It suggests a deeper, maybe more intrinsic compatibility.
So the big takeaway seems to be, yes, pre-existing similarities matter for friendship, but there are maybe levels of similarity. Surface level stuff, linked to demographics, might spark an initial connection. But for a connection to really grow and last, it might depend on this deeper alignment in how our brains fundamentally process and interpret the world around us. That's the neural homophily driving relationship development.
That seems to be a very fair summary of what this study suggests. It provides pretty strong evidence that the way our brains are configured to interpret, attend to, and maybe even emotionally respond to our environment can be a precursor for forming stronger social bonds later on.
Now, we should add the usual caveats, right? This was one study with a specific group MBA students at one university.
Absolutely. It's a specific context. And the participants volunteered, so generalizability always needs caution. However, the power here is showing that this neural measure, this measure of similarity in processing shared experiences, could predict future relationship dynamics even without knowing all the infinite other things that might make two people similar, like their genetics, their detailed upbringing, specific life experiences, all the stuff that presumably shapes those brain responses in the first place.
It's like the brain similarity measure is a useful proxy for that deeper compatibility, whatever its ultimate origin.
Precisely.
So recapping for everyone listening, it turns out the way your brain syncs up with the strangers while watching a movie clip might actually predict whether you'll become closer friends with them months down the road. It's less about the clip itself and more about that shared neural wavelength for processing reality.
Which leaves us with a really interesting final thought, something for you to maybe reflect on. If our brains show these pre-existing patterns of compatibility, if we can predict who we'll grow closer to based on neural similarity even before we know them, what does that say about conscious choice in friendship? How much of forming our deepest, most lasting connections is active effort versus perhaps just recognizing a compatibility that was in some sense already there in our wiring? Are we choosing or are we just discovering?